Keanu Reeves pushed open the wooden door of the small roadside bar. The neon lights outside flickered weakly in the night, and the air inside smelled of smoke, cheap beer and fried food. He stepped in quietly, his simple black jacket hanging loose on his shoulders. He was not dressed like a movie star, no expensive watch, no gold chains. Just a plain man who looked tired but calm. He had been traveling all day and all he wanted was a warm meal in peace. The bar was filled with rough laughter, mostly from a group of bikers sitting at the biggest table near the jukebox. They were loud, their leather jackets marked with patches, their boots dirty from the road. A few locals sat at the counter, heads down, trying not to get involved. The music was low, but the bikers' voices cut through everything. When Keanu walked in, their eyes immediately noticed him. Something about him felt familiar, but in the dim light and his humble clothes, they couldn't be sure. Keanu moved to a quiet corner near the back. Far from the noise, he pulled out a chair slowly and sat down. His movements were gentle, almost too gentle for the kind of place he was in. A waitress walked over, surprised to see him. She knew who he was but kept her lips sealed. She took his order politely and he thanked her with a soft smile. His voice was low, calm, respectful. In a world where so many demanded attention, he was different, quiet, almost invisible. The bikers, however, had sharp eyes. One of them leaned back in his chair, squinting, and whispered something to the man next to him. A burst of laughter followed. Then another biker turned his head fully, looking at Keanu like a predator watching prey. Their laughter grew louder, and even though the words weren't clear yet, the target was obvious. The quiet stranger in the corner had caught their interest. Keanu ignored them at first. He placed his hands on the table, fingers relaxed, waiting patiently for his food. His mind was far away, perhaps thinking about the long road behind him, or the faces of fans he had met. He wasn't the kind of man to show pride or anger. He believed in living simply, even when the world looked at him like a star. But to the bikers, his silence looked weak. They didn't see the calm strength in his eyes, only a quiet man they could laugh at. The first jokes came loud enough for the whole bar to hear. "Hey, doesn't that guy look like some washed-up actor?" one of them shouted. Another slapped the table and added, "Maybe he's practicing for his next boring role." The laughter rang out, harsh and sharp. The locals at the counter shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Keanu, waiting to see if he would respond. But Keanu didn't move. His eyes stayed down, his shoulders calm. He took a sip of water slowly, like the words in the air didn't touch him at all. That only made the bikers laugh more. They leaned closer to each other, pointing at him, mocking his stillness. They wanted him to break. They wanted to see a reaction. But Keanu had built a life on patience. He had walked through harder moments than insults in a bar. He knew words could only hurt if you let them inside. So he stayed silent, letting the noise pass over him like a wave. Still, the bar felt heavy. The waitress walked back with his plate, placing it gently in front of him. Her hands trembled not because of him, but because of the bikers watching. She gave him a quick nod of respect and walked away fast. Keanu whispered "thank you" softly, so soft only she heard. It was a moment of kindness in a place filled with roughness. But kindness was the very thing the bikers didn't understand. They wanted a show. They wanted to prove that the stranger was weak. They didn't know that this man had faced pain in silence many times before. They didn't know that his quietness wasn't fear. It was strength. As Keanu lifted his fork and began to eat slowly, the bikers' laughter grew again, filling every corner of the bar. The locals pretended not to listen, but inside they wondered how long the quiet man would last. To them it looked like a storm was building. The bikers were pushing, testing, daring him to respond. Yet in that small corner, Keanu Reeves sat calmly. A man who didn't need to prove himself to anyone. His silence was louder than their insults, though they hadn't realized it yet, and so the night began. With laughter from one side and calmness from the other, a clash of noise and silence, a test of patience that would soon draw everyone into a story they would never forget. The bikers leaned back in their chairs, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. They had been whispering for minutes, but now they grew bold. Their laughter was no longer just about him. It was aimed at him. The quiet man in the corner who looked too calm, too gentle for this rough place. They wanted to break that calm, to drag him into their world of noise and pride. One of the bikers slammed his beer mug on the table, the sound echoing through the bar. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Hey, doesn't that guy look like he's lost?" he shouted. His friends howled with laughter. Another added, "Or maybe he's hiding from his own movies. I mean, look at him. Sitting there like some saint?" The whole group laughed, their voices harsh, filling the air like smoke. Keanu Reeves sat quietly, his back straight, his eyes down on his plate. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't afraid. He simply refused to answer hate with hate. The waitress walked by quickly, giving him a worried glance. She could see how the bikers were circling with their words like wolves testing their prey. But Keanu gave her a small nod as if to say, "It's fine." He picked up his fork again and ate slowly. Every bite was calm, measured. He would not let them steal his peace, but silence only made them louder. To the bikers, his calm was an insult. They wanted him to react. One of them leaned back and shouted, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be an action hero? Where's all the fighting? Where's the tough guy?" His friends slapped their knees. Roaring with laughter, another man shouted, "Maybe he's not even Keanu Reeves. Maybe he's just some wannabe who looks like him. Too poor to buy a decent shirt." More laughter followed, harsh and ugly. Some locals at the counter shifted in their seats. One older man muttered under his breath, "That's Keanu, all right." "You fools." But he didn't dare say it louder. Nobody wanted to get involved with a gang of bikers still. Their eyes stayed on the quiet figure in the corner. Everyone wanted to see what he would do. Keanu placed his fork down gently. He lifted his glass of water, took a slow sip, and set it back without a sound. He did not even glance at them. His face was calm, his eyes steady. His silence was stronger than their noise. It only confused them more. Their pride demanded that he answer, that he fight. But he refused to give them what they wanted. One of the bikers finally stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. He swaggered over to Keanu's table, his boots heavy on the floor. The bar grew quiet, all eyes followed him. The man leaned down, placing his tattooed hands on the table. His breath smelled of beer and smoke. He sneered and said, "Hey, pretty boy. You too good to talk to us. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" His friends laughed from their table, cheering him on. Keanu lifted his eyes for the first time. He looked at the man, not with anger, not with fear, but with patience. His voice was soft when he spoke. "I'm just here to eat," he said calmly. The biker blinked, surprised by the gentleness of his tone. No challenge, no insult, just quiet words. But that only made him angrier. He wanted a fight, not kindness. The biker smirked, tapping Keanu's plate with one finger. "Is this what action heroes eat? A little plate of fries?" "That's all," his friends roared again, the sound of their laughter bouncing off the walls. The waitress froze near the counter, her hands trembling around a tray. The locals watched in silence, the air thick with tension. Keanu simply gave a small smile. He nodded once and said, "Enjoy your night." "Friend." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The biker straightened. Confused, he had expected anger, maybe a punch. Instead, he got kindness. And kindness is something men like him didn't know how to fight. He stood there for a second, unsure. Then his friends called him back with more laughter. He turned and walked away, shaking his head but saying nothing more. The bikers laughed louder, trying to cover their unease, but deep down, something about that exchange unsettled them. The quiet man had not bowed to them, nor had he fought. He had simply stayed calm, stronger in silence than they were in noise. The locals at the counter exchanged glances. They had seen something rare, a man who didn't need to prove his worth with fists or loud words. But the bikers weren't finished. Their pride would not let them stop. They wanted more. They wanted to break him. They raised their voices again, louder than before, calling out insults, mocking his movies, his life, his face. They wanted to see him snap. They wanted to see him rise from that chair and fight. Yet Keanu did not move. He continued eating slowly, each bite unhurried, each movement calm. It was as if the storm of laughter around him did not exist. He was a man in his own world, untouched by cruelty. His silence was not weakness, it was strength. And the longer he stayed quiet, the more the room began to see it. Even those who mocked him would soon realize they were not in control. The night was only beginning, but already, the bar had turned into a stage, one side full of noise, pride and mocking voices, the other side, just one man, calm as stone, unshaken, waiting. His silence was powerful, and though the bikers did not know it yet, that silence would soon bring someone else into the story, someone who would change everything. One of the bikers could not sit still any longer. He wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted to show his friends that he could make the quiet stranger react. With a loud scrape of his chair, he stood and walked back toward the corner where Keanu sat. The bar became tense again. All eyes followed him, his boots heavy on the wooden floor as he made his way across the room. He leaned down over the table, close enough that his shadow covered Keanu's plate. His smirk was wide, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's wrong, hero? Too scared to talk to real men," he sneered. His friends at the other table cheered him on. Banging their mugs on the wood, Keanu looked up slowly. His calm brown eyes met the bikers. There was no fear in them, no anger either, only patience. He set his fork down gently and folded his hands together. The room went quiet. Everyone waited. They wanted to hear what the quiet man would finally say. His voice was soft, almost too soft for such a tense moment. "I don't want trouble," he said kindly. The words floated through the silence like water calming fire. The biker frowned. It wasn't the response he expected. He wanted anger. He wanted a fight. Instead, he received gentleness. "Don't want trouble," the biker repeated loudly. Mocking his words, he tapped a dirty finger against Keanu's plate. "You sure eat like trouble, fries and salad. Look at this. A movie star's dinner." His voice rose with every word, his friends roaring with laughter again. The waitress froze by the counter, her tray shaking in her hands. She knew the man at the table wasn't just anyone. She knew the stories whispered about him, the quiet kindness, the tragedies, the humility. But she also knew the bikers didn't see any of that. They only saw a calm man they thought was weak. She wanted to step in to defend him, but fear held her back. Keanu didn't flinch when the biker tapped his plate again. He simply gave a faint smile. His words came slowly. "Steady as a river. Enjoy your night." "Friend," he said. His tone carried no sarcasm, no bite. It was real. It was simple kindness for a second. The biker didn't know what to say. His smirk faded just a little. He blinked, confused. He had walked over expecting a fight. He had wanted to throw a punch, to feel powerful, but the calmness in Keanu's eyes made him hesitate. It was like looking into a mirror that showed him his own anger, his own ugliness. His friends shouted from across the room, "Come on!" "What's taking so long?" They laughed and raised their mugs again. Urging him to do more, the biker straightened. Hiding his hesitation with a snarl, he shook his head and turned away, muttering under his breath as he walked back to his seat. The bar stayed quiet for a long moment. The locals exchanged nervous glances. They were surprised, not by the biker's retreat, but by the way Keanu handled it. No fists, no shouting, just calm words that disarmed a man who lived for violence. The older man at the counter whispered to the man beside him. "That's strength, real strength." The bikers tried to recover their pride. They laughed louder, mocking Keanu again, throwing insults into the air, but there was a crack now. Their friend who had gone to test him had returned unsettled. They could all see it in his eyes. He had faced the quiet man and somehow lost without a single blow being thrown. Keanu picked up his fork once more. He returned to his meal as if nothing had happened. Every movement was calm. Every bite was unhurried. It was as though the mocking voices didn't reach him at all. His peace was unshaken. His silence was heavier than their noise. But for the bikers, their pride still demanded more. They were not satisfied. They wanted the whole bar to laugh at the quiet man. They wanted him to leave in shame. One of them shouted across the room, "Hey, actor boy, where's your stunt double? Can he eat for you too?" The laughter burst out again. Cruel and sharp, the locals no longer laughed. They watched with quiet respect. They saw a man who could stand against a storm without lifting a fist. They saw patience that most of them could never manage. And though they didn't say it out loud, they admired him. The waitress walked back toward Keanu slowly. She leaned down and whispered quickly, "Don't mind them, they don't know who you are. Just finish and leave, please." Keanu gave her another soft smile. "Thank you," he said. His calmness even comforted her, easing the fear in her eyes. The bikers slammed their mugs again, trying to pull all attention back to themselves. But the bar no longer belonged to them. The quiet man in the corner had shifted the air. His refusal to fight, his refusal to respond with anger. It had changed the room. The bikers didn't realize it, but the more they mocked, the smaller they looked in the eyes of everyone watching. Keanu finished another bite and wiped his mouth gently with a napkin. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't running away. He was simply living his truth, peace over pride, dignity over noise, but deep inside the hearts of the bikers, unease was growing. They could feel their power slipping, and that fear would soon push them to go even further. They didn't know it yet, but their game was leading to something none of them expected. The night was far from over, and the real storm was only beginning. The bikers were restless now. Their laughter had started to lose its edge. Their first attempts to provoke the quiet man had failed, and that only made their pride burn hotter. They wanted to win. They wanted to break him. They wanted to see him snap so they could prove to the whole bar that he was weak once stripped of his calm mask. One of them slammed his boot against the leg of his chair, making the wooden floor creak loudly. He shouted across the room, "Hey hero, show us some kung fu moves. We paid for a show." The others burst out laughing, pounding their fists on the table. The sound echoed through the bar like thunder, but in the corner Keanu didn't even turn his head. He continued to eat slowly, chewing with the same calm pace as if their words were nothing but distant wind. This silence infuriated them. Silence was not what they wanted. They wanted anger, they wanted violence. One biker picked up a peanut from his bowl and flicked it across the room. It bounced off the edge of Keanu's table. Keanu glanced at it, then simply brushed it away with his hand. His face didn't change, his eyes didn't rise to meet theirs. His calmness was like a wall they could not climb. The waitress whispered nervously to another customer. "They're going to push too far." Her voice shook with fear. She had seen these men fight before, and she knew how ugly it could get. But the customer only shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on Keanu. "That man isn't ordinary," he said softly. Another biker stood up, his heavy boots thudding on the floor as he walked toward the jukebox. He pretended to be casual, but his eyes never left Keanu. He pressed a few buttons and the jukebox roared to life. The music was loud, harsh, drowning out the quiet air. The man turned back to his group and shouted, "Now let's see if our silent guest can hear us." The whole gang laughed again. Raising their mugs high, Keanu finished the last bite of his food and set his fork down gently. He picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth, and folded it neatly beside the plate. Every move was controlled, almost too calm, like a man who lived in a different rhythm than the chaos around him. His stillness made the bikers uneasy. It was as if he carried a strength they could not see but could feel pressing on them. One of the younger bikers, eager to prove himself, suddenly grabbed his own mug and shouted, "To the great Keanu Reeves, the hero of bad movies!" The others roared in laughter, their voices shaking the walls. He took a big gulp of beer and slammed the mug on the table. The liquid splashed onto his hands. He didn't care. He only cared that everyone was watching him mock. Keanu finally lifted his eyes. His gaze moved slowly across the room, not sharp, not angry, just calm, steady. For a second, the laughter softened. The bikers felt it. Those eyes weren't afraid. They weren't broken, they were steady as stone. It was like looking into the calm center of a storm. The young biker who had shouted the toast suddenly looked away. Embarrassed, his laughter died in his throat. The leader of the group saw this and grew angry. He couldn't let silence defeat them. He slammed his palm on the table and barked, "Don't just sit there, talk back, or are you too soft for this place?" His voice was rough, desperate. He was losing control and everyone in the bar could feel it. Keanu spoke softly, his voice clear but gentle. "I'm not here for a fight," he said. His words carried across the room, settling over the noise like a heavy blanket. The bikers stared, stunned by the simplicity of the answer. No fear, no anger, just peace. The locals shifted in their seats. They felt respect building in their hearts. Respect for a man who could stand firm without lifting a hand. A man who could take insult after insult and still speak with kindness. Some of them even started to smile faintly, proud in a quiet way that someone like him existed. But the bikers weren't ready to stop. Their pride demanded more. One of them grabbed a bottle from the table and rolled it across the floor. It stopped near Keanu's feet. The man sneered, "Pick it up for me." "Hero." His voice was sharp, full of arrogance. Everyone in the bar froze, waiting. Keanu looked down at the bottle, then back up at the man. He didn't move, he didn't bend. His voice stayed calm. "You can pick it yourself," he said softly. The biker's smirk vanished. He had been expecting obedience, not quiet refusal. The bar grew heavy with tension. The waitress gripped her tray tightly, her eyes wide. The bikers exchanged glances, unsure now. Their noise was beginning to fade into confusion. They had thrown insult after insult, yet the quiet man had not cracked. He had not fought back, nor had he bowed. He simply stayed himself, calm and unbroken, and then, just as the bikers grew ready to push harder, the door creaked open. A gust of cool night air swept inside. The sound of boots on the wooden floor cut through the silence. Everyone turned, their eyes widened. The bikers froze, their laughter died instantly, because the man stepping through the door was someone they all recognized. The bar was about to change forever. The wooden door creaked open with a long, slow sound. The cold night air slipped into the smoky bar, carrying with it a sudden chill that made everyone turn their heads. The bikers, still laughing a moment ago, went silent without meaning to. Their eyes locked on the figure standing in the doorway, broad-shouldered and solid. His boots echoed against the wooden floor as he stepped inside. It was Chuck Norris. His name carried weight long before he even spoke. The locals who sat at the counter froze, their drinks halfway to their mouths. Some whispered his name under their breath as if afraid to say it too loud. The bikers who had been mocking and shouting minutes ago shifted in their seats. The smirks on their faces slipped away. Replaced with unease, they all knew the man. They all knew the stories. Chuck scanned the room with calm, steady eyes. He had that look that didn't need words, a look that told everyone he already knew what was happening. His gaze moved slowly across the bar until it landed on Keanu, sitting quietly in the corner. His plate empty, his posture calm. Then Chuck's eyes slid over to the bikers. One by one, he didn't glare, he didn't snarl, he just looked. But that was enough. The air grew heavy, the leader of the bikers forced out a laugh, trying to hide the sudden weight pressing down on him. He raised his mug and said, "Well, well, look who walked in." The old cowboy himself? His voice cracked slightly, betraying the fear he tried to bury. His friends chuckled nervously, but none of them sounded as loud as before. Chuck didn't answer him. He walked slowly, each step calm but powerful. He moved toward Keanu's table and stopped beside him. The bar was so quiet now that even the jukebox music felt too loud. Chuck glanced at Keanu, then back at the bikers. His voice was calm but strong. "You're laughing at the wrong man," he said. His words cut through the silence like a blade. The bikers stared, their bravado faltering. The younger one who had shouted earlier looked down at his boots, his hands tightening around his mug. The leader swallowed hard. He wanted to laugh, he wanted to mock, but his throat was dry. Chuck Norris was not someone you mocked. Keanu gave Chuck a small nod. He didn't ask for help, but the respect between the two men was clear. Keanu's silence had already spoken louder than the bikers' noise. But now, with Chuck's presence, the balance of the room had shifted completely. The waitress, who had been trembling the whole night, finally let out a breath she had been holding. Relief washed over her face. The locals leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. They knew the bikers had pushed too far, and now they would face something they couldn't handle. Chuck took another step forward, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was heavy. "You think you're strong because you mock a man who doesn't fight back," he said. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "But strength isn't in noise. It's in silence, it's in restraint, and this man," he pointed slightly toward Keanu, "is stronger than all of you put together." The bikers shifted in their seats. Their leader clenched his jaw. His pride fought against the truth in Chuck's words. He stood up trying to look tough, but his hands trembled slightly. "We were just having fun," he muttered. His voice didn't carry the same fire it had earlier. His friends looked at him, waiting, but none of them spoke. Their laughter was gone, replaced with shame. Chuck's eyes didn't move from them. His presence alone was enough to quiet the room. He leaned slightly closer to the group and said, "Respect is earned, not shouted. You crossed the line tonight." The bikers avoided his gaze. Some looked down at the floor. Others stared at their empty mugs. Keanu remained calm in his seat. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile at their defeat. He simply sat with the same quiet strength he had shown all night. His calmness and Chuck's presence together created something the bikers couldn't touch. It was dignity and respect standing side by side. The locals began to murmur softly. Some nodded their heads. One older man whispered, "That's how men should be. Strong without needing to hurt anyone." The waitress smiled faintly for the first time that night, relief flooding her face. The biker's leader finally sat back down. His face red with embarrassment, he muttered under his breath, "Let's get out of here." His friends nodded quickly. Eager to leave, they had walked in with pride and laughter. But now they shrank under the weight of two men who didn't need to lift a hand to defeat them. Chuck turned back to Keanu, his expression softening. Keanu gave him a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. Chuck shook his head. No. You didn't need me, he replied. His voice carried admiration. He knew Keanu's patience had already won before he ever walked through the door. The bar slowly returned to normal. The locals relaxed. Conversations resumed in low voices, but the memory of that night, of the moment Chuck Norris walked in and stood beside Keanu Reeves, would never be forgotten. It was more than just a bar story. It was a lesson, a reminder of what real strength looked like. Chuck Norris stood tall in the middle of the bar. His presence filled the room in a way no one else could. He didn't need to shout, he didn't need to swing a fist. His steady gaze alone was enough to make the loudest men shrink in their chairs. The bikers who had been mocking and laughing minutes earlier now sat stiff. Their smirks gone, the leader tried to recover his pride. He cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, forcing a crooked smile. "We were just having fun," he said. His voice cracked slightly. His friends chuckled weakly, trying to back him up. But their laughter didn't carry any real strength. It sounded hollow. Chuck took a slow step closer, the sound of his boots striking the wooden floor like thunder in the silence. He rested his hands lightly on the back of a chair, his eyes never leaving the group. "Fun," he repeated calmly, "is when everyone laughs, not when you pick on a man who chose peace over pride." His words cut through the smoky air, and every ear in the bar caught them. The younger biker, the one who had mocked Keanu's food earlier, swallowed hard. He had never seen Chuck this close before. He tried to look tough, but his shoulders slumped under the weight of those words. His mug trembled slightly in his hand. He set it down quickly before anyone could see. The leader tried again, his voice louder this time. "Look, we didn't mean nothing by it. We were just testing him, seeing if he had some fight in him." His attempt at confidence failed when his words trailed off under Chuck's steady stare. The silence that followed felt heavier than any punch. Keanu sat quietly at his table, his expression calm. He didn't add a word. He didn't need to. His quiet dignity had already spoken louder than the biker's noise. The respect in his silence made Chuck's words even sharper. Together, without planning it, the two men had cornered the bikers without moving a muscle. Chuck finally leaned forward just a little, his voice low but powerful. "You think strength is in fists and loud voices. In mocking someone you don't understand," he said. "But strength is restraint, it's patience. It's knowing you could fight but choosing not to. That's why this man is stronger than all of you combined." He tilted his head slightly toward Keanu, the respect clear in his eyes. The bikers shifted uncomfortably. The leader clenched his jaw, his pride battling with the truth he didn't want to admit. His friends avoided Chuck's gaze, staring at the table, the floor, anywhere but those piercing eyes. Their earlier bravado had drained away, leaving only shame. One of the older locals at the counter spoke up softly, his voice carrying in the quiet. "He's right. You all saw it. The man never once raised his hand, and still you couldn't beat him." His words were simple, but they echoed in the bar like a verdict. Several others nodded in agreement. The room itself seemed to turn against the bikers. The leader slammed his palm against the table suddenly, the sound making the glasses rattle. He wanted to fight back, to grab hold of control again. His pride screamed for him to stand tall. But when he looked up and saw Chuck standing there, calm and unshaken, his courage faltered. He muttered something under his breath and sank back into his chair. His men exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. Chuck straightened, his eyes sweeping across them one last time. "You owe this man an apology," he said. His tone was final. There was no room for debate, no opening for excuses. The bikers froze, shocked. The leader's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at his men, hoping one of them would laugh, hoping one of them would save him. But none did, their courage was gone. The younger biker finally stood, his voice shaking. "Sorry," he said quickly. His eyes flicked toward Keanu, then back down to the floor. The others followed one by one, muttering apologies, their voices quiet and strained. The leader hesitated the longest, but under Chuck's stare, even he finally forced the word out. "Sorry," he grunted. Keanu gave a small nod. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He simply accepted their words with the same calmness he had carried all night. "It's all right," he said softly. His tone was so gentle it almost sounded like forgiveness. The room seemed to breathe again. The locals relaxed. The waitress let her shoulders drop in relief. For the first time that night, the tension lifted. Chuck stepped back, satisfied. He knew the bikers had learned their lesson. Not through fists, but through dignity. The bikers sat in silence now, their earlier noise gone. Their mugs untouched, their pride broken, they realized they had been measured by two men who didn't need to prove anything. And they had fallen short. The weight of that truth pressed harder than any punch could. Keanu picked up his glass of water and took a slow sip. His calm presence filled the silence like a bomb. Chuck stood beside him. A wall of quiet strength. Together, they had shown everyone in the bar what true power looked like. It wasn't in fists or in noise. It was in character, in patience, in respect. The leader leaned toward his men, whispering urgently, "Let's just go." His voice had lost all its earlier fire. They nodded quickly, eager to leave. Eager to escape the weight of the room, they stood clumsily, their boots heavy on the floor as they shuffled toward the door. Nobody laughed now. Nobody cheered them on. The only sound was the door creaking open as they disappeared into the night. Inside the bar, the quiet returned, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was peaceful now, filled with relief. The locals exchanged glances, nodding in silent respect for what they had witnessed. The waitress walked to Keanu's table, her smile small but sincere. "Thank you," she whispered. Not just to him, but to both men. Keanu gave her a kind nod. Chuck gave her a reassuring smile, and in that simple moment, the lesson of the night was clear. True strength needs no noise, no fists and no anger. Sometimes it only takes silence and the courage to stand beside what is right. The bar was finally quiet. The loud voices that had filled the air only minutes ago were gone. The heavy boots of the bikers had faded into the night, leaving behind an uneasy calm. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. Everyone was still processing what they had just seen. Keanu sat at his table, his plate empty, his glass of water nearly finished. He looked as calm as he had when he first walked in. He had not raised his voice. Not once. He had not thrown a punch, not once. Yet somehow he had won a battle without ever fighting. Chuck stood nearby, his presence still strong, his eyes scanning the room before softening. The locals began to whisper quietly to each other. An older man at the counter shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like that," he said. His voice carried respect. A younger man beside him replied, "They mocked him, they pushed him, but he never broke. That's real strength." The two nodded to each other, their eyes turning toward Keanu with quiet admiration. The waitress finally found the courage to approach. She walked carefully to Keanu's table, her hands no longer trembling. She placed a fresh glass of water in front of him and said softly, "You handled that better than anyone could have." "Thank you." Keanu looked up and gave her a gentle smile. "Thank you," he replied simply. His kindness made her blush slightly. She had seen men twice his size crumble under far less pressure, but he had stood firm with nothing but calmness. Chuck pulled out a chair and sat down across from Keanu. The bar remained hushed. Every eye was still on them. Chuck leaned forward, his voice low. "You know, most men would have fought back. Most men would have tried to prove something." Keanu gave a small shrug. "Fighting them would only feed their pride. Silence takes it away." His words were soft but carried the weight of truth. The locals heard this and murmured among themselves. Many of them had lived their whole lives believing strength was about who shouted loudest or who hit hardest. But tonight they saw something different. They saw how restraint could be stronger than rage and how kindness could disarm cruelty. One of the younger locals, a boy barely in his 20s, stood up and walked closer. His voice shook slightly, but he forced the words out. "Sir," he said, addressing Keanu, "I'll never forget this night. You showed us what it means to be strong without hurting anyone." His words were awkward, but honest. Keanu nodded at him kindly. "Always choose peace when you can," he answered. The boy smiled, his eyes shining with respect. The atmosphere of the bar changed completely. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and reflection. People who had once sat in silence now began to talk quietly about what they had seen. Some shared stories of times they had reacted with anger and regretted it later. Others admitted they never would have had the patience Keanu showed. The room became warmer, lighter, as though the darkness had been lifted. Chuck finally leaned back in his chair. His arms crossed, his eyes held a glimmer of pride. He had known many fighters in his life, men who could crush others with strength, but rarely had he seen a man win with silence. "You've earned more respect tonight than any fight could have given you," he said. Keanu shook his head gently. "Respect isn't something I look for. It's just better not to add more anger to the world." His answer made several people in the bar pause and nod slowly. The waitress returned again, this time carrying a small plate with a slice of pie. She placed it in front of Keanu. "On the house," she said with a smile, "for reminding us what patience looks like." Keanu chuckled softly. "That's kind of you," he said. He picked up his fork and took a small bite. Calm as ever, the locals began clapping softly. It wasn't loud or forced, it was slow, respectful. One by one, the sound grew until the whole bar was applauding quietly, not for a show, not for a fight, but for the lesson they had witnessed. Keanu glanced up, surprised, then gave a small nod of gratitude. Chuck allowed himself a small smile as well. When the clapping faded, the older man at the counter raised his glass and said, "To Keanu Reeves, the man who showed us strength without fists." The room lifted their glasses. Even the waitress joined. Keanu looked down slightly, embarrassed by the attention, but he raised his water glass politely and nodded. The night settled into peace after that. People spoke softer, their laughter kinder. No one dared return to the cruel mocking that had filled the room earlier. The memory of the biker's failure was still fresh, and the respect for the quiet man in the corner was too strong. By the time Keanu stood to leave, the whole bar watched him. He placed money on the table for his meal, more than enough to cover the bill, and thanked the waitress again. Chuck stood with him, and together they walked toward the door. The locals gave them a respectful silence as they passed. Some even nodded or whispered their thanks. When the door opened and they stepped out into the cool night, the bar remained hushed for a moment. Then slowly, voices rose again, but they were softer now, kinder. The lesson of that night had sunk deep into everyone's hearts. Respect had been restored, not by fists, not by shouting, but by patience, humility, and the quiet courage of a man who refused to be broken, and by the presence of another man who stood by his side when it mattered most. The night outside was cool and quiet. The sound of the bikers' motorcycles had faded into the distance long ago. Inside the bar, people still whispered about what they had seen. The air was no longer heavy with tension. It was lighter now, filled with respect and thought. The moment had passed, but its echo remained in every corner of the room. Keanu Reeves and Chuck Norris had walked out together, side by side. The image of the two men leaving the bar was something no one there would ever forget. They didn't boast, they didn't smile in victory. They simply carried themselves with calm dignity. Two men who had nothing to prove to anyone back inside. The locals continued to speak quietly about the lesson they had just witnessed. An older man told the young ones, "Remember this night. You'll never see something like this again. Strength is not about fists. It's about control." The younger men nodded, their eyes wide. They had grown up hearing stories of fighters, but now they had seen a different kind of fight. One fought with silence, patience, and respect. The waitress sat down for a moment. Finally able to breathe without fear, she whispered to herself, "That's the kind of strength I wish more people had." She thought of all the men who had come into the bar over the years. Men who raised their voices, who tried to prove themselves with anger and fists. None of them had ever left behind this kind of impression. Meanwhile, Keanu and Chuck walked down the quiet street. The stars overhead flickered through the thin clouds. For a while they didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their silence was comfortable. It was the silence of understanding. Chuck finally broke it with a small chuckle. "You know, most people wouldn't believe what just happened back there," he said. Keanu smiled faintly. "Most people don't need to. They just need to remember the lesson." Chuck nodded. "You reminded everyone in that room tonight that strength doesn't come from noise. And when they pushed too far, you still didn't break." His voice carried respect. Keanu shook his head slightly. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just didn't see a reason to fight." His words were simple, but they carried the kind of wisdom only years of living could give. Back in the bar, people kept talking. Some replayed the scene in their heads. Others told it as if it were already a legend. The bikers had left ashamed, but in their shame there was also a seed of change. They had faced two men who showed them something they had never seen before, and even they would remember it for the rest of their lives. One of the younger locals raised his glass and said, "That's a story I'll tell my kids one day." The others nodded. Some of them even laughed softly now, but it was a different kind of laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, it was warm, respectful. The atmosphere of the bar had changed completely. For Keanu, it was just another night. He didn't see himself as a hero. He didn't think of himself as someone teaching lessons. He was just a man who believed that kindness was stronger than anger. He knew life was already full of enough pain. There was no need to add more. Chuck, however, understood the weight of what had happened. He knew the story of that night would travel far beyond the walls of the bar. As the two men parted ways under the night sky, they shared a simple handshake. It wasn't long, it wasn't loud. It was the kind of handshake that carried respect between equals. Chuck smiled and said, "Keep doing what you do. The world needs it." Keanu nodded, his calm eyes reflecting the dim streetlight. "And the world still needs men who step in at the right moment." The next day, the story began to spread. The locals who had been there couldn't stop telling it. Some told it at work, others at home. Each time the story was told, it grew more powerful. People spoke about how Keanu Reeves had faced mocking bikers with patience, and how Chuck Norris had walked in at just the right time to stand beside him. It wasn't just a story about two famous men. It was a story about character, about strength, about respect. Even the bikers who had been humbled that night carried the memory with them. They didn't admit it out loud, but the lesson burned in their minds. They had been taught that night that true strength wasn't what they thought it was, and deep down they knew they would never forget. For the bar itself, the night became a legend years later. People would still talk about it. Some would say they were there, others would wish they had been. It became one of those rare stories that grows larger with every telling. Not because it needed exaggeration, but because the truth itself was powerful enough. And so the final lesson of the night was simple. True strength doesn't come from fists, from loud voices, or from pride. True strength comes from patience, from dignity, from knowing when not to fight. Keanu showed it through his silence, and Chuck confirmed it with his presence. Together they reminded everyone that the greatest victories are often won without a single blow. That night at the small roadside bar would never be forgotten. Not by the locals, not by the bikers, and not by anyone who heard the story afterward. It became more than just a memory. It became a reminder that kindness and calmness are sometimes the strongest weapons a man can carry. And in the end, that was the lesson that stayed in every heart. Long after the laughter and noise had faded away,